Okay, great. Thanks for having me here today. Yes, I'm Alex Woodley. I'm here from North Carolina State. I've been here for about a year and a half now. And today I'm going to talk about soil health principles for resiliency in organic agriculture. This is part of a larger talk, and I may skip some slides if I'm running out of time. But I'm going to build upon some of my previous research in both conventional and organic to really talk about how soil health can really impact the productivity of your system. So, a brief overview of what we're going to talk about is just a background on why some of my examples are coming from across the country and in Canada, what is soil health in a general sense, and looking at some of the research experiences that I've had and trying to wrap it up with a take-home message. So, the reason I'm giving some examples from Ontario is I did my PhD at the University of Guelph, where I looked at organic agriculture, small grains, and organic amendments. I did a 3-year postdoc with the AAFC, where again I continued looking at crop rotation, soil health, and water quality. And now I'm a sustainable and organic soil fertility specialist at NC State, where I'm continuing the same kind of vein of research. So as we know, soil health is a hot topic right now. There's a lot of organizations all kind of coalescing around soil health and trying to find either a way to test it or a way to define it. And it's still kind of the Wild West in terms of actually coming up with protocols and everything, but there's a lot of energy around it, which I find really interesting. If we look at the NRCS definition of soil health, I'm sure you've seen it, but soil health is referred to soil quality is defined as the continued capacity of the soil to function as a vital living ecosystem that sustains plants, animals, and humans. So no reference to agriculture, but in general, when I talk about soil health, and when most people talk about soil health, they're referring to production ag, but in the broadest sense, it's just an ecosystem service. And the main difference between soil health and soil health testing compared to the typical soil test you see is that you normally look at the static chemical components and maybe some physical. It's a snapshot of what's going on. The interesting thing is when you have a biological test, they tell you a more dynamic system. How's the nutrients recycling? How's the capacity to build carbon? And they really kind of tell you more about the system's energy rather than just the chemical and physical. So that third component has been really exciting in terms of interpreting how we manage things, how can we improve systems. So what is a healthy soil? These are just kind of some kind of gut feeling description of what a healthy soil is when you look at it. Good soil tilth and structure, good water storage and drainage, supply of nutrients, active microbial biomass, and this idea of resilience that when it's bad years, you keep a healthier soil, you'll get through that year a little bit better than if you had a degraded soil. And that's a hard one to pin down. That's really where a lot of interest lies in what is a healthy soil and what that means to a system. So I asked my students in my sustainable ag class which soil is healthier, and they'll typically point to the one on the left. But the thing I want to drive home for them is that it's context-based. This is in northern England, this is in eastern North Carolina. And so despite this maybe being a healthier soil, it's not very useful to compare it. You have to be really regionally context. You have to have context regionally, sorry. You've got to look within your own region what your potential soil health can be. Sandy or coastal plain soils will never achieve organic matter that other will, but within the system, you really need to optimize it. And this is where the 4 principles of soil health that the NRCS puts up. I agree with them, and they're kind of a nice background basis to work off of. So keep the soil covered as much as possible, disturb the soil as little as possible. That's that protect idea. And then, well, not only protecting what you have, you also want to build your system. So by keeping plants growing throughout the year to feed the soil, diversify as much as possible using crop rotations and cover crops. And in reality, most organic farmers are doing one or more, and you can't really be a successful organic farmer without using these practices anyway. So this is just to drive this home. This is the overall concept. But for me, I think soil organic matter is at the center of all of this. All these biological indicators and tests are all integrated through having soil organic matter. So it's a reservoir and supply of nutrients, it increases soil microbial activity, and improves aggregate stability, and improves water infiltration and water holding capacity. And these last two are really important when we think about projected changes to climate in the southeast. It's hard to generalize across a huge span, but I tried anyway. But droughts will be more frequent and severe, and yield greater irregularity of rainfall. So you may not get less annual rainfall, but you might get it in stronger bursts. And so your soil's ability to take in that water and hold it is going to be essential. You're going to have increased flooding, warmer temperatures, it's a little harder to deal with, and projected increased severity of tropical storms. So this is where this water dynamic and this health dynamic is important. And there's also a lot of pressure being put on soils to be a solution to some of the climate change issues. They want a CO2 drawdown. This is a New York Times article, Can Dirt Save the Earth? And it's talking about carbon sequestration. So agriculture and organic agriculture is an interesting spectrum. We have contributed to agriculture has contributed to climate change, greenhouse gas emissions, land conversion. We're also being impacted by it, and at the same time, we've also been tasked to be part of the solution. So you can be part of any part of this when it comes to sustainable agriculture research. I like to use this slide as kind of an example of where we are at with soil organic matter. Typically, when you convert land over, you lose about 30-50% of your organic matter over the first 30, 40 years. And then we kind of stabilize at a lower level. And that's where a lot of the farms are at in the US right now, at this new equilibrium. We've been doing the same management for years and years. And we're at a good point to really increase. And this is where we can start doing some more sustainable practices where we can increase our soil organic carbon. And it's a win-win on both ends. We get to sequester more carbon for the CO2 component, but we also see a lot of soil health benefits. And this is where I'm going to start using some of my examples from my research. This is the Harrow Research Station. This is in Ontario. It's near the Detroit border on Lake Erie. So a little different in the southeast, but I think these are universal concepts. And so I was able to work on a long-term rotation that started in 1959. It's a really simple setup. It's monoculture corn versus corn, oats, and alfalfa, and 2 years of alfalfa. Kind of an old school rotation. And then within these rotations, we had either it's fertilized or it's unfertilized. And we've tracked yields for these last 50, 60 years. And we've also tracked whether the tile drainage and the surface runoff. So we're able to watch the water dynamics. And so this looks like a time lapse, but it's not. These are all taken on the same day, and this corn is all planted on the exact same day. And you can see there's fundamental differences in how this corn is doing. This is when you have a complex rotation and you have good fertility at the right levels. This is when you're relying on rotation alone, so you're still seeing decent response from that alfalfa turned over. Here's continuous corn, despite having adequate soil fertility, it's looking terrible. And this is, as you can expect, 50 years of continuous corn with no fertility. And I know this is not a realistic example, but it's great to actually see the extremes. And you can see that by not having adequate fertility, you're dropping your yields by 28%, continuous down by 45%, and then continuous only is 85% drop in yields over the 60 years. But more importantly here, more interestingly, is the water dynamics. So the corn in rotation, the healthier soil, you see 80% of the water that's captured is going through the soil column and being collected in the tile drains. That means that the plant has access to that water when it's moving through. Whereas the continuous corn, 93% of the water was going as surface water. So only 7% of that water is entering the system and available to the crop. And this is a clay soil, so it seals up a little differently than a sandier soil, but this is important to take home. You're completely fundamentally changing your water dynamics. And so you have heavy rainfall, then it's going to run off and that water is not going to be available. So it's just a really nice way to highlight how important it is to have a nice rotation and adequate soil health. And here's just a zoom in, you can just see the crusting that's forming on these degraded soils rather than these healthier soils. So why is it difference? Well, none of this is too mind-blowing, but you have more tillage, higher bulk density, lower aggregate stability, lower infiltration, and it's a feedback process. You have poorer and poorer years, year after year, you're returning less organic matter back to the soil, and it's kind of a negative feedback loop. Whereas here you have a 42% increase in soil organic carbon compared to the continuous corn. You have that 2-year perennial crop to allow things to kind of settle, you have deeper rooting going on, and over time, significantly higher yields. And it's that, again, divergence between degrading and improving. You get this huge difference in water dynamics. So that was a long-term study, but here's kind of a midterm study from, again, still in Harrow, Ontario. So this is 15 years crop rotations. This is kind of a little more dynamic. And here is soil organic carbon, and down here is the rotations I looked at. So that's monoculture soybean wheat plus red clover, 2 years soybean wheat, and 2 years soybean plus red clover. And so you can see the soybean brings almost nothing to the system. We found that it just returns nothing back, and it seems to be a minor rather than a contributor to anything productive. The second you add wheat to your system, you have that fibrous rooting system, and you tend to get an accumulation. And then having red clover, you get that additional bump. And the red clover is only there in Ontario from late October till early April, and you don't get the biomass you get down here. And so it looks like nothing, but you can still track it in only 15 years. You get 17% increase. And then again, you do a second year of soybeans, you bring that organic matter back down. So you're not returning that biomass at the same level if you had just wheat and soybean. But again, you're able to increase your complexity, you incorporate cover crops, you're getting a bump. And so that's, I think in 15 years, that's pretty responsive. And it all comes down to biomass return. There's no magic to this. It's just what you increase, this is estimated total residue biomass, this is soil organic carbon. And as you increase, it's lockstep with the soil organic matter. But it also plays out in yields. You can see that these, again, all relate. The green column here is the yield of the soybean, and the red column is the soil organic carbon. And they move together, so that you're not only getting increased organic matter and soil health parameters, but it's playing out in yield, which is the most important part for a lot of these producers. So the benefits of diversifying crop rotation are beyond the soil health. There's generally less tillage required, you reduce soil erosion, you can increase soil organic matter, but in an organic context specifically, you can reduce pests, build up, help control weeds, a better distribution of labor, and you're basically creating resilience in your system. And having perennial sod in rotation, so like 1 or 2 years of forage, it really improves your ability to increase soil organic matter, increase living roots, and knock back weed seeds. So lastly, we're going to jump into tillage. It's kind of catch-22 in organic. If you choose weed control or soil health is often the argument. I don't think that's quite fair, but it's the main control, and it's been really, if you do really aggressive tillage, you are going to have a decrease in soil organic carbon and a decrease in soil structure. So my PhD student in North Carolina is looking at yield stability, so this is preliminary data. But we have a long-term site where we look at corn and soybean, and we have 9 different tillage treatments. So any tillage you can imagine, we've looked at that over 30 years on a corn-soybean rotation, from no-till to moldboard disc. And what we did is we clustered the 30 years by soil moisture and temperature. So hot, dry years, cold, wet years, and then we really drilled down into the yield effects. And in general, we saw that a 67% increase in yield with no-till compared to moldboard across the whole 30 years. So that makes sense. But the interesting thing is when we look at the clustering, when we look at these hot, dry years, we're seeing at the top here is all we want you to look at is no-till. We're seeing a 150% increase in yield compared to moldboard or plow when you have these hot, dry conditions that we're projected to have more. So it's really showing that stability is really increased if you lower your disturbance. And this is increasing disturbance, and you can see increasing differences as you go up, especially in that red, hot, dry years. So I'm going to skip the slide. Some of the other options for reduced tillage. This is funding through the OFRF, looking at using residue and roller crimping in organic sweet potatoes. This is kind of more of an art than a practice, is to get the right amount of biomass and the right ability to plant into it, but it can be really excellent for preventing evaporation and disrupts the power of rain. So I think there's a potential there. It's just, it's variable year to year, but we're working on that in the next couple of years. And one last thing I'm going to touch on is commercial health tests. Soil health tests, okay, I'm going to in North Carolina, Roper did use some of the commercial health tests that are out there right now, like the Cornell soil health test and the Haney test at these long-term tillage sites that we were talking about. And here's an example of these tests. I'm not sure if you're familiar with them, but they're basically report cards, looking at that physical, that biological, and that chemical parameters. And at the end of the day, the Cornell tests showed that, all the treatments were considered low health, despite having no-till and moldboard. So we saw huge treatment differences. The soil health test is not capturing that difference at all. And there's no clear link with soil health and historical yields at these sites. And what it's telling me is that we're not quite there yet to have soil health tests that were created in the Midwest, not refined for the South, because we generally have lower health soils when we have metrics from the Midwest. So we're not quite there yet. Sorry to kind of wrap it up quickly, but take home is improving soil health is mitigating risk. Good soil structure helps receive and hold water. Biomass return is key. That's anything to take home, is just constantly increasing your biomass in your system. It really will increase soil organic matter. And then I would say soil health tests are still being refined for the Southeast right now. So I'd like to acknowledge my coworkers in Canada and at North Carolina. Thanks. Do you have any questions?
Okay. Are your long-term studies at NC State, is that all going organic stuff? Is that conventional stuff? Is that a mix? And how do they compare?
So yeah, the NC State is, that site's organic, or sorry, that's conventional, but I think the fundamental stuff is still valid across any management, I think. Yes?
For the long-term study, what was your source of added fertility?
For the, up in Ontario?
Yeah.
Ontario it was conventional as well. It was just inorganic fertilizer. So no additional biomass was being, it was the biomass from the crop alone was from these improvements. Yeah.
In your long-term rotation, you know, part of our rotation is fallow. And we consider it an important, one of our 7-year, crops is not doing anything.
Yeah. Is there like much growth going on then in the fallow, during the fallow period? Like
you don't mess with the land, it grows.
Yeah, so that, I think it's more leaving it just fallow. Well, I'm used to up in Ontario, you plow in the fall, there's nothing coming back until the spring, whereas fallow might be a little different in the south. But from what I've seen, it's just the more biomass you can get back in the system, the better. But there's a water dynamic. If you're in a water limited area, then there is concern with fallow for recharge.